Welcome, everyone. This is Bill Maher, and this is Inflection Point, a podcast brought to you by Catholic Men for Jesus Christ. Very excited today to actually have our guest and our topic, which is actually the Christology found in the works of J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. This is intellectual candy, spiritual candy in a certain sense, and we're going to have a lot of fun. My guest, Bill Donaghy of the Theology of Body Institute. Bill, you've been there since 2006.
That's right. Yeah, in one way, shape, or form or the other. I've been there for many years now, 18 years.
It's amazing work that the Institute has been putting out for so many years, working with Chris West and everything like that. You guys actually have some amazing courses as well that people can actually sign up through the website. Well, maybe we'll talk a little bit about the Theology of Body Institute. But relative to this topic today, you offered the coolest thing I've ever heard, a 5-day course / kind of retreat on Lewis and Tolkien. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that actually comes back.
Yes, it's coming back. It'll be every 2 years. It's an elective course for the Institute. And yeah, I do have to pinch myself sometimes and is this my job? I'm also getting paid for this. I get to do this work, which is amazing, to open up, in this case, the sacramental worldview, the imagination that's been baptized of C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien. And I tell you, it's not only fun, because it's a world of mythology and fantasy and story, but it is massively formative. I mean, we had this retreat, the first time offered was this past November, and you realize Lewis and Tolkien are taking us on a faith journey. They're taking us deep into the heart. They're having fun in this fantasy world, but they're also sharing their own journeys, their own stories. I know a Carmelite nun who calls it not just an epic of fantasy, but an epic of virtue. And she reads Lord of the Rings as spiritual reading, this Carmelite nun. So this is fun, but it's also next level when you talk about the adventure of faith.
That's amazing. Many years ago, my wife bought a homeschooling book, and it was all English grammar and vocabulary and everything. It was all based off of Tolkien. It was the coolest course.
Wow.
The kids actually wanted to do it.
That's great.
So this is even better for adults because you can really dive deep. I wanted to also mention a little bit more about you and your background. You're going to be offering a retreat in Oxford, England, and that's in July, correct?
Well, yeah, an actual pilgrimage in the footsteps of C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, and G.K. Chesterton. Everybody uses initials back in the day. I mean, that's like...
I did the same thing.
You did, didn't you? So yeah, the pilgrimage is going to be July. It's the second half of July. We're going to traverse through not only Oxford University, where Lewis and Tolkien lived and taught. We're going to visit the grave sites of Lewis, Tolkien, and Chesterton. We're going to go to their churches. We're going to walk the fields where they were inspired. You know, even Tolkien himself. We're going to go to the Cotswolds, which is very Shire-esque, and that inspired Tolkien. We're going to walk those paths. We're going to visit the pubs. You know, we're going to have a wonderful time reading their works on the soil where they were inspired to write them. So that's coming up.
That's exciting. You know, maybe you'll even walk down the path. I think it was a path outside of Oxford where Lewis had a moment of inspiration.
Yes,
Tolkien
Addison's Walk.
Addison's
Walk.
So where they were talking about the faith, and Lewis at the point was an atheist. And at one moment, something clicked. And he went back, and I think the way he put it was, I started my journey with Tolkien on that path, an atheist, and I came out of it a theist. A moment of inspiration. Yeah. That's pretty cool. So we're going to actually have a link for this retreat. So please, they have spaces still available. If you want to, it doesn't matter where you are in the world. If you're in South Africa, go to Oxford, Theology of Body Institute. They do an amazing job, and you're gonna have a lot of fun. You know, you can be a little inkling, if you will.
Yes.
You know,
yes, indeed.
I'm sure you're gonna go. Was it the Bird and Child, or what's the name of the bar?
The Eagle and the Child.
The Eagle and the Child.
They called it the Bird and the Baby.
The Bird and the Baby.
Yeah. So yeah, we definitely want to hit those spots, and yeah, we'd love to have anybody come out for that. It's tobpilgrimages.com, but yeah, you'll find the link in the...
Wonderful. We're excited about that. So before we dive into some of the writings and the quotes, and my gosh, I have a bunch here, because if you're going to talk about Lewis and Tolkien, you need to talk about Lewis and Tolkien
Right.
in their words as much as you can. But let's talk a little bit about them. So C.S. Lewis, who was he?
Yeah, it's funny, Lewis and Tolkien, neither of whom were English, by birth are celebrated as these great English writers, but Lewis is an Irishman.
Yeah.
C.S. Lewis, Clive Staples Lewis, was born in Belfast, Ireland, 1898, and had a younger brother. He had the loss of a mother very young, which kind of shaped him. But he grew up in Ireland and made his way to England eventually for education, and eventually, of course, became an Oxford Don, and now is best known for that. That's the microwave version of his life. A bachelor for most of it, then married Joy Davidman later in life, and then became, at Oxford, great friends with J.R.R. Tolkien. He also had quite a life, as you kind of alluded to already, of being born Christian, Anglican, baptized, and then abandoning that faith as a young teenager, kind of rejecting it. Just didn't seem real to him. What was real to him was the world of mythology and great story. He fell in love with the Norse mythology.
Norse in particular, yeah.
Yeah, Icelandic traditions and myths. So it was quite a journey of rejection, but then through the friendship with Tolkien, this acceptance, this like, okay, well maybe, and we'll probably talk about a little more in depth about that experience on Addison's Walk, when Tolkien kind of revealed with the help of another inkling, Hugo Dyson, that what he loved all along from his childhood was actually a fairy tale that came true in the gospel.
Wow.
And turned him around. But a phenomenal writer, a phenomenal, really, after the conversion, a Christian apologist, who millions of people have read. And they just love his works. I've been formed by C.S. Lewis for decades now.
Oh, yeah, you think about Mere Christianity, maybe one of the greatest Christian books of the 20th century.
Right.
Which was a compilation of his lectures, right? Wasn't it during World War II?
Yeah, built out from his radio broadcasts and lectures.
Yeah.
That's right. Screw Tape Letters is a phenomenal work. The Great Divorce. And, of course, The Chronicles of Narnia.
Grief Observed. He went through a lot of suffering.
Yeah, so many. I mean, prolific writer. And this is one of the differences we might talk about is Lewis, his output was massive. Tolkien, not so much, but it may not have been quantity, but it was quality.
Unbelievably
so, and we could talk maybe in this interview here about the differences between them and their writings. But yeah, so that's a bit of Lewis. And then
one thing before you go to Tolkien.
Yeah.
We were, before the show started, we were talking quite a bit. We had our little pipe smoke.
We did have a smoke out there.
And in fact, we smoked Tolkien's weed itself, right?
That's right. Capstan was Tolkien's favorite tobacco, and I quite graciously gave the leftovers to Bill, so you'll have that to smoke later. Three Nuns was the favorite tobacco of C.S. Lewis.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and that really was constitutive of their right. Tolkien himself said, I smoke my pipe so much I can't write without it. So it's a crazy.
Well, your intellect goes up as soon as that pipe hits your lips. At least it feels that way.
Oh yeah, it's incense to heaven.
Anyway, where I was going with all this actually was we were talking in the back, and of course G.K. Chesterton came up.
Yeah.
And in my mind, it's funny. Tolkien and Lewis are intimately connected through friendship, through sharing, through Oxford, all those things. But even though Chesterton was some years earlier, he is, in my mind, connected. And clearly in Lewis's conversion. Oh, yeah. Because we talk about that, was the Addison Road conversation that Lewis and Tolkien had. That was sort of that final moment. Leading up to that, Lewis was blown away by G.K. Chesterton's The Everlasting Man.
Yes, that's right.
In particular, his chapter on Christ and the mythology.
Yeah.
So that's a heavy book. But that's another amazing piece of literature that's worth to dissect.
Let's linger there for a minute before we shift gears, because C.S. Lewis, again, be careful what you read. And he would say that too. He would say an atheist can't be too careful of the books that they read, because he found himself, when he got to that level of teaching and being a don at university, surrounded by these wonderful intellectual men that he just loved to banter with, and he loved everything about it, except the fact that so many of them were Christian. What? And he loved reading Chesterton, but again, he's like, he's fantastic apart from his Christianity. So you could see there was this wound, right?
Yeah.
There's this wound, and it always goes back to what is this wound and why? And it was finally a moment of him opening up that wound to grace and getting that healing. And then all the lights went on, But it was The Everlasting Man, this great signature work by G.K. Chesterton, that was speaking a language of the love of story. Chesterton thought all of life was a story, and more a romance.
Well, I have a great quote on that.
Oh
later.
yeah,
We'll
bring
get
it
to.
on. And so he, in a way, was luring C.S. Lewis into this kinship of story. It's like, I love it, I love it, I love it. And then boom, the greatest story, the fairy tale that came true is the gospel. Christ isn't just another figure. He is the quintessence. He's the fulfillment of all that the ancients longed for, all the pagan myths, all the great mythologies were thirsting for the reality that the word would become flesh, that divinity would enter humanity. And when, boom.
Yeah.
And Lewis fought that. He struggled with that. He
Yeah,
called
no.
himself the most reluctant convert in all of England. He's like, no. But when he did, he became the greatest apologist.
And you see sacramentality in their works too. You talk about that; it's beautiful. Another, and we're going off a complete tangent here, but you talk about great English writers. I would put George MacDonald there too,
Oh, yeah.
because what is that? Fantasies or whatever.
Fantasties.
Fantasties. Yeah. Another book that inspired both Lewis and Tolkien as a youth.
Yes, I love that you're bringing that up because George MacDonald, who was a Scotsman, predating, of course, both of them, he definitely was influential. He was a great writer of fairy tales and stories. He was a clergyman for a bit too, and there's whole books of his homilies. But at heart, he wanted to tell great stories and fairy tales. And George MacDonald, he's this sort of hidden figure behind C.S. Lewis, inspiring him, and Chesterton, and Tolkien, and Lewis Carroll, and so many other great authors that many people know. C.S. Lewis said, I don't think a thing I've written has not been touched somehow by the master.
Yeah.
He called him the master, George MacDonald.
MacDonald, yeah. Well, those men created a whole genre that you can't turn the TV on and not find something
Oh, right.
built off of those men in terms of the genre.
Right.
It's immense. It's disarming, And we mentioned something about Lewis being an atheist, and I'm speaking to our brothers and sisters atheists out there right now. Jordan Peterson, on an interview with Peter Kreeft, we were talking about that earlier too, mentioned that in his experience, so many people that are atheists early in their life had some terrible experience with a Christian, a priest, a nun, or whatever, that is a wound. So I want to personally apologize to you for anything someone who has professed to be a Christian yet did something that really hurt you. I apologize. I know Bill apologizes. And we just ask you to be open to this side of this amazing genre, this side of reality, which is absolutely beautiful, that inspired these men to great heights, because there's a lot of sunlight in believing that there's something more than just this world around us. I didn't want to get to this yet, but I have an interesting quote from, let me see if I can find this. Actually.
Can I speak into your story when you
Go
look for
for
that?
it.
Because I think that's part of this whole diving into the works of these men, but you can't separate it from their life, their lives. And just as they've given us great stories, they're sharing off the microcosm of their own stories.
Yeah.
And our stories aren't done yet. So anybody tuning in and listening to this because maybe they love the writings, just hear it as an invitation too. I'm not done yet. You're not done yet.
Heck
But
no.
the thing is panning out and realizing I have a story. And Pope Benedict XVI once said that there's nothing trivial or insignificant in your whole life. So every little experience that you've had and how it's shaped you and what direction it put you in, maybe it was a father wound or a mother wound, it's not trivial. It's not insignificant. And when I read Lewis and Tolkien, and knowing now more and more, and I keep studying their lives, I realize like, wow, that story or that imagination right there in this story, that character, I can see reflected from an experience of their life, which is an amazing thing to see.
Yeah.
Anyway, it just gives me a lot more empathy and compassion than just to see everybody's on this path of story,
Yeah.
and it's not over yet.
Big time. And, when I look at it was actually a quote from Faust, ironically. But when you look at the world, and if it's just material, there's a built-in sadness that you can't get around. Methinks by most 'twill be confessed that death is never quite a welcome guest. Death is not a welcome guest in a material world, but it is a welcome guest in a world with Christ. And maybe we'll unpack a little bit through these two amazing authors.
Yes. In fact, as you're saying that, Bill, Tolkien himself said, essentially the Lord of the Rings is all about death. And people hearing that in an interview he gave, I think back in the 60s, like, what? Isn't it about sort of bravery and courage and fellowship and fighting evil? It's like, it's about death. It's about the long defeat, as he called it. But knowing that beyond the rim of the world, there is hope. There is always hope. That sort of materialistic atheism, that idea that there's no meaning, there's no transcendence. Lewis and Tolkien both, as they grew and developed in their own faith lives, they recognized that's toxic.
Yeah.
That's poison. And that's killing us. And in a powerful way, they both were writing stories as an antidote to liberate us from that nihilistic idea that, death is the end of all. And what's the point in living?
Yeah.
So they recognized, I need to inject a kind of remedy into the situation to show there's more. So as you move through their great stories, Chronicles of Narnia in particular, with Aslan, who goes through a death and resurrection.
The stone table.
At the stone table.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to be, check your pulse if you don't see the connections with Christ here. But in The Lord of the Rings, you've got characters, multiple characters who are going through a paschal mystery, a death and resurrection, from Frodo, pretty obvious, to Aragorn and the Paths of the Dead.
Paths of the Dead, he dies, literally.
To Gandalf, literally falling into the abyss with the Balrog. And it's real death, and there's no other way. And I think that's how prophetic Lewis and Tolkien were, to show us this paschal mystery through poetry, through story. And then somehow C.S. Lewis called it smuggling theology. Right, I'm smuggling theology here.
Stealth theology.
Through the back door, we realize, like, oh my goodness, this is the way.
Yeah.
This is the way, and there is no other way.
Well,
really.
death, you can't escape it.
Right.
There is no escape. Now, in Silicon Valley, they're trying to, but the reality is, in the end, you're not going to be able to escape it. So.
And we don't want to escape it.
No,
because there's
this
new
is
life.
it.
Right. But I've discovered at the level, the fractal, smallest level, the microcosm of my life. I need death to break, like death to self, death to my own sense of control, like let it go. As a father of four and a married man, like I'm invited constantly to a purification that makes me bigger on the other side. My heart expands, it widens if I let myself be broken, which is a kind of death, right? And you see that in all these characters in their great stories. Yeah, it's
death to self.
Yeah, and it becomes a new life. When you hoard and clutch and cling, that's a death that turns to withering. And there's the figure of Gollum in the Lord of the Rings.
There is, and there's an analogy to that. When you think about the Dead Sea, it draws its water from the Jordan River. The pure, pristine waters of the Jordan that sustained Palestine, Israel forever. Yet it enters the Dead Sea, right? And it dies. It dies because there's no outlets.
Right.
There's no, it accumulates inside of you. So we do have to die to ourselves. We need, if you will, spiritual outlets.
Right.
Psychological outlets, physical outlets. And that occurs in community and love and relationship.
Yeah.
Which is so much of what these men wrote about.
Yeah. Can I riff off of that? There's been this accusation that fantasy is escapism. And Tolkien himself, another interview I remember seeing, he was questioning, isn't this just like you're kind of running away from something in this whole fantasy world? And he said, well, there's two kinds of escape, There's that escape from responsibility, but there's also the sense of an escape from a prison. And he says, that's what I'm talking about. And that is profound. Because who hasn't felt a kind of lockdown, this whole cancel culture, like you can't practice this faith, you can't have this view, you can't believe in that. This shutting us down, it's like, no. C.S. Lewis also, he talks about this kind of dark spell that's been cast over us for almost a century. And we need a kind of good magic or a good spell to break us from this scientific reductionism, this materialism, this atheism, which he battled and then got liberated from. And they both saw a story as this way of liberation, of freedom.
Of coming really indirectly around about to reality itself.
Yes.
Because really it's not fantasy, it's leading towards reality.
Yeah. You rediscover what life is. If it's a good story and it's honest and true and it's authentic and it's pursuing what's true, good, and beautiful, you'll find your way back to the real. I mean, that's in C.S. Lewis's review of The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, 1955 or so. He was one of the first to review it, of course, because it was his buddy. Sure. So he wrote a review and he said, this is not an escape so much as it's dipping all the things we know, the ordinary, into myth. And it shows us that way it's true light, right? Things like apple and road and horse, and we rediscover their potency. I wake up and I'm rekindled in my wonder at what is. And I feel that way. And whenever and I'm always reading Lord of the Rings, I'm always reading Lewis, but whenever I put that book down, I don't feel sad that, well, now I'm in the real world. I actually am fascinated by the rediscovery of the real through the stories. And Tolkien once said that. He said, where did Middle-earth come from? What's this all about? It's my fascination with the world itself, with creation.
And he did love, talk about a man who loved trees.
Yes.
It's great, that great picture of him sitting down at the base of a tree amid the roots, and that was Tolkien. Yeah. And he appreciated every little thing, Right. He modernity. Speaking of which, we got to talk a little bit about Tolkien's background. We're just going all over.
Yeah, we jumped over. I know. It was just fun. It's like a tree. Branches are everywhere. Well, yeah, let's dip into Tolkien. He also, known of being this great English writer, but he was South African by birth. He experienced, tragically, the death of his father. His father was a banker in South Africa and died when Tolkien was around 3 years old, I believe. So his mother brought him and his brother Hilary back to England, and she had to raise the boys on her own.
And then she died.
Yeah, she died when he was, I think, 8, maybe. I'm getting off of my facts here. I should know it. But so very young, obviously very impressionable at those periods. So these talk about wounds, right? The loss of his parents early on. And Lewis losing his mother very early. That kind of was also, I think, probably a bonding for these two men. But from that young age then back to England, growing up in rural countryside as a young boy, that's where you kind of get the echoes of the Shire, his love of creation.
He did. He also had a very strong male figure in the priest.
Yeah, so his mother converted to Catholicism and sadly was abandoned by her family for that move. And but she had made great friends with the Oratorians at the time. And Father Francis Morgan was this wonderful priest who ended up financially assisting and supporting the boys, becoming, in Tolkien's own words, a second father. And he had a deep love for Father Francis. He really did.
Helped put him up in housing, which he ended up meeting his wife.
Yes, he ended up meeting his future bride at one of these boarding homes, which is a great story in itself. But Father Francis Morgan has a great story, too. He was actually secretary to St. John Henry Newman.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's a wonderful photograph of him standing behind St. John Henry Newman. So you could see that Father Francis as a father figure for Tolkien, then St. John Henry Newman might have been like a spiritual grandfather figure in the patriarchy, so to speak. That's been shared by some scholars. So, yeah, Tolkien, his Catholic faith then gifted to him in such a sort of a martyr's witness by his mother, Mabel. Yeah, he saw her suffer for it. And it wasn't just an emotional attachment because it was his mother's faith, and she sort of died, sadly, because of financial withdrawal from the family and her illness. But he owned his Catholic faith. He served Mass with Father Francis Morgan. He and Hilary, his brother, did too. And he was a very devout young man. And his Catholic faith was the world to him, everything to him.
He has one of the most beautiful letters written to his son Michael on the Eucharist. And it just goes to show how deep he was spiritually. I'm going to read it if that's right.
Yeah, please do.
So this is letter 43 about Tolkien's love of his faith, and the source and summit is the Eucharist, right? He writes, out of the darkness of my life, suffered, so much frustrated, I put before you the one great thing to love on earth, the Blessed Sacrament. There you will find romance, glory, honor, fidelity, and the true way of all your loves on earth. And more than that, death by the divine paradox. And I could continue, but there it is. I mean,
Imagine getting a letter like that from your dad.
Wow. Right?
Yeah, it shows you his, and this would have been, decades and decades after the death of his mother, that this was his faith. He firmly believed it and communicated it to his children. And his letters, those letters, there's a new edition expanded now of even more discovered. And he speaks of faith. He talks about marriage. He talks about the presence of guardian angels and how important they are in your life, the Eucharist. It's just such a gift to have this figure.
Brilliant. But, he did go through the crucible of suffering. They both fought in the World War I, the trenches.
Yeah, Lewis and Tolkien both
very
were
ugly.
soldiers.
In fact, Tolkien had this band of young brothers in high school, best friends, and they all died except him. So he suffered even more. And then he went on to Oxford. Of course, he had his inkling friends and all that stuff. But this is a man who did go through a crucible in life. But he came out very hopeful. And maybe sometimes cantankerous, as some have said.
Yeah.
But beautiful faith. So as we shift and we start moving into a little bit deeper into their writings and so forth, especially their fantasy. You mentioned a little bit about Aslan. Lewis was much more, or he utilizes allegory much more. Where, of course, if you're very into your Christian faith, you're going to recognize that Aslan is Jesus Christ.
Yes.
You're going to
Spoiler
recognize
alert.
it. Spoiler alert, right? Whereas to your point earlier with Tolkien, it was more sort of like built into the framework of the world without no mention. There was no mention of religion. Now, if you get to the Silmarillion, it's much more the mythology and everything that he built up. But you still have that Christ figure and relationship, the religion right in there. I mean, you mentioned, Christ the king in Aragorn, Christ the priest in Frodo, Christ the prophet in Gandalf, all going through a death, all going through a resurrection of sorts, all suffering.
Yeah, they had. It's so interesting, and it shows you what you can learn so much also about authentic friendship and what that looks like. I mean, they were deep friends, but they also had very different views, particularly in this way of writing their stories. They were very different, and Tolkien actually wasn't a big fan of the Chronicles of Narnia.
No, he wasn't.
And he was pretty vocal about that here and there. But that shows you, like,
on that note, didn't the first rendition of Narnia, Lewis, just after getting bashed on it, completely scrapped it and rewrote it.
Well, that's the thing. They were really refining each other. And that's what the Inklings was about in a really big way. It was the Inklings, which was the gathering of these literary figures. It was up to like a dozen, or actually more than a dozen, off and on over a couple of decades. And they were helped shaping each other, and they were open to critique. They would compliment, but they'd also chastise a little bit. Like, there's too much dialogue going on here. Clean that up a little bit, or change this, or why is this? And so meeting at the pub once a week, and also at C.S. Lewis's rooms at Magdalen College, they would meet there too, Tuesdays and Thursdays. Open and ready to do. Imagine, and they were all, they had rapier wits and intellects, but that's where Lord of the Rings, drafts of it, were read for the first time before publication. Yeah, he called it The New Hobbit. That was what it was called for a while, The New Hobbit, because it was supposed to be a sequel. Lewis's, I think, Screwtape Letters, the Space Trilogy, the first book, was read there for the first time before publication.
Was that Paralandria?
Yeah, that would have been Out of the Silent
Out of the
Planet.
Silent Planet was
Yeah,
the first
and then
one.
Paralandria and That Hay the Strength. That trilogy by C.S. Lewis is
Phenomenal.
I love it. But yeah, they're
Ransom is Tolkien.
yes, and so you also see that. You see, it's so fun to see these things. That Ransom Elwyn, the character in C.S. Lewis's trilogy, is a philologist, and he's in the middle of his life.
But Cambridge philologist.
Yeah, so inspired by Tolkien.
yeah.
C.S. Lewis makes his way subtly into the Lord of the Rings. in the
Treebeard.
figure of Treebeard, yes, the deep booming voice of the Ent. But yeah, they would really like have those little quips and barbs with each other, but all in love. And there's just beautiful snippets we get from their letters and their exchanges where you see how integral they were to each other. And I mean, Tolkien himself said, for a stretch of time, I had no other encouragement in my work of Lord of the Rings, which took 13 years to write. He said, I have no, really the only voice of help who believed my stuff was any good was Lewis,
Yeah.
who really encouraged him to keep going.
Helped him go. It's
Yeah.
interesting because his first book, Hobbit, was more like a children's book for his kids.
Yeah.
Whereas Lord of the Rings was like his life's work. Because it's the tone is very different.
Very, very different, and surprising to himself, I think, as well. He didn't, as he says elsewhere. Tolkien says, "I didn't invent Middle Earth; I discovered it." He discovered these characters. Aragorn, who appears first as Strider at the Prancing Pony, he wasn't even sure who is this guy, where is he going, and becomes a central figure. So that's part of this whole thing with Lewis and Tolkien is that. With the baptized imagination, you're opening yourself to God. Even in some conscious ways, you're receptive. You're perceptive, right? But you're also very receptive. And you're not afraid to kind of let the character go. You're on the journey with them. And that's a fascinating vulnerability, isn't it? And we as readers, we get to go on this journey too and discover them. But it's wild. It's wild how they came. It kind of came as gift to them. Sometimes through a word. In Tolkien's case, he was probably 20-something, early 20s, when he read an old Anglo-Saxon poem, and there was a particular phrase that just struck him, and he said, "There's the seed of my whole mythology." Or Lewis saying he had this vision of a lion came bounding in, and he was like, "Who is this?" And it became Aslan.
Yeah, the Lion of the Tribe of Judah.
Yeah, or the visual of a fawn carrying parcels with a red umbrella.
Mr.
It was
Tumnus.
Mr. Tumnus the fawn from Narnia. But it came as gift. It almost came like, like a dream would come to St. Joseph. And then what do you do with this? And then it became real,
I less on a much lower level. I can totally relate to that. I published a few books for my kids. I'm going to actually give you
Yeah, I'm so
copies.
grateful for that. Excited.
Inspired by these men, mythology and everything, all that stuff. And, through my junior journey, we'll say, I can completely relate where, I had an idea of where I wanted to go. And I had characters thought through a bit. But then people would just pop up in the story writing process. And all of a sudden they took on an important role. And this it's amazing how the actual writing process, there's an inspiration there.
Yeah.
And you see that clearly in their works behind the scenes, because if you will, within the framework of both their worlds, there's a providence at work.
Yeah, for sure.
There is a hand at work that is very clear in their works.
Yeah, Tolkien's very famous for that line about, this is saying that The Lord of the Rings is a profoundly Catholic and religious work. Not initially in my writing of it,
Not by
but
design,
in
but in
revision, by going
their
back,
revision.
I see.
Yeah.
And I love that because it shows you, art that is authentic and transcendent becomes a bridge to religious experience. John Paul II said that art can become a bridge to religious experience. But it should never be sort of packaged or coerced,
Yeah.
Shia LaBeouf had that amazing interview with Bishop Robert Barron a while ago, where he said, who's now, he's now Catholic.
Yeah.
He says, I want it to feel like you're a used car salesman, like you're trying to sell me something.
Yeah.
You don't have to put a label on it, like I'm a Christian artist or you're an artist who's Christian. And, if you're sincere and authentic in the journey, it's just going to come speaking through. Tolkien himself said, I just wanted to write a great story that would hold people's, a long, great adventure story that would hold people's imagination. And it certainly did.
Yeah, he couldn't get around it because he was a Catholic man.
Right.
So,
and that's your cosmology or
that's your
worldview.
cosmology. That's the structure. There are certain places you're not going to go. There are certain places you want to go, subconsciously even.
Right.
And that all stemmed up from that foundation.
And that's the presence of the divine. And I think as human beings, as creators, or sub-creators, as Tolkien would say, that's the way to do it, is to be subtle and to be just very Marian, kind of like Our Lady, like, let it be done unto me according to your word. Let my imagination flow for my communion with you, and not be forced, not be fake, but be sincere.
Yeah.
And you're kind of letting the Lord lead you there.
Yeah.
And when he does it, wow.
Yeah, and it works even in dialogue with people. If talk is cheap. If I'm going to have a discussion with someone and say, this is what I believe, that's moralizing. But the beauty of these stories is there's no moralizing there. This is the stories. But they are what they are. And oh, by the way, they marry over perfectly to the real world, to this world.
Yeah.
On so many levels. On so many levels.
And back to that, that the humility, I think, is really important. To make great art, to tell great stories, you can't give what you don't have. And how do you get it? Well, you get it by being humble. You get it by being attentive. The Inklings was essential to the writings of these two great men. They had to have those meetings. They had to be vulnerable enough to say, like, well, here's what I want to share. And allow it to be chiseled a little bit.
Yeah. Gold is only purified but through fire.
Yeah.
The fire
and to sometimes let it go. I mean, there's been some great research. There's a great book called Bandersnatch, and it's all about the Inklings and their interconnections and their workings together. There's some great stuff where Tolkien had all this dialogue in the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring between the hobbits, and he loved it. He was having fun with it. But C.S. Lewis was like, there's way too much chatter going on. Can we get the action going here? And you can actually see the first drafts and then juxtaposed with the finished product of the Fellowship of the Ring. You're like, wow, thank God C.S. Lewis helped him out. Not to mention that Frodo was going to be named Bingo.
I heard that.
Praise the Lord that they got that changed, right? But it was the help of Lewis.
Bingo.
Yeah, it would have changed everything. But I just love, again, that the artist is humble. The artist is willing to listen and be attentive and to change.
It would be great to have, because that there are drafts that have been thrown away that are gone permanently. But it'd be great to have some of that stuff.
Yeah. Well, great scholars are finding things, and it's really kind of fun to see it. There's also an alternate ending to The Lord of the Rings that almost went into the final publishing.
Do share.
Yes. So Tolkien couldn't end the story. He just couldn't. And if you've read Lord of the Rings, the appendices. He just can't stop.
It keeps going.
He was going to have a scene at the end of Lord of the Rings. Now, spoiler alert, they destroy the ring. Sam comes home, and the beautiful ending is, he returns to the Shire after Frodo sails from the Grey Havens to the Blessed Realm, and the lights on at the house, and it brings you to tears if you know the story so well. But there's Rosie, and
Eleanor
she welcomes him. She puts Eleanor on his lap, his little baby, and he says, "Well, I'm back." Yeah. Well, the alternate ending that Tolkien had that almost made it. But it was, again, the Inklings and some others that helped, shorten it up. It would have been like 15 years later. And he's surrounded by all of his children, Sam, the hero of Lord of the Rings in many ways. And he's having a chat with Eleanor, who's now a teenager, and she's fair and beautiful, and she's wondering about different things, and they're talking. And there's all this conversation again with his kids, and they're asking about the stories and Mr. Frodo and the king, and it goes on and on. But one of the things I love about it is at the very, very end, the kids go off to bed. Eleanor is helping to put them to sleep with Rosie, the mother. And Sam closes the door, but just before it closes, Tolkien writes that he could hear far off the waves against the shores of Middle-earth. And it stirred that old ache, something to that effect.
He was the only, really, in a sense, uncorrupted ring bearer.
Yeah. Now, yeah. So that's a beautiful alternate in a way. There's a lot more dialogue, but that line at the end about stirring the old ache.
Yeah.
If you read the appendices in Lord of the Rings, you find out, and I don't know, Bill, if you knew this, but Sam eventually does take one of the ships from the Grey Havens, and
He
as the
goes.
final ring bearer, because
Yeah.
Sam bore the ring for just a little bit of time when he thought Frodo was dead, he does take the ship, and he goes to the Blessed Realm. So he'll meet Gandalf and Galadriel and Frodo and Bilbo. So it's kind of amazing.
It's beautiful. Really,
Yeah.
that ending, if it doesn't bring you to tears, you haven't read it.
Yeah, you haven't really read it.
You really haven't. So I got to jump back. I think at this point we are in need of a great story.
Oh, yeah.
And that's clearly what these works were for the 20th century. Maybe you can unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, again, early on, I think when we sat down here, we talked about Chesterton mentioning that life is this great story. It's all a story.
Yeah.
Right? And if it's a story that we're all in, there must be a storyteller.
That was Chesterton.
Capital S. That was Chesterton
That was
saying
Chesterton.
that. Yeah. And what's going on today, I feel like we've lost our narrative.
Yeah.
We've lost our story. We're kind of fumbling through in the dark, thinking we have to make it all up. We have to create our own world. We have to be self-determining. There's so much confusion here. I mean, it's even gotten to the level of our own bodily identity. We think, well, I have to make it up. I have to create myself. And so if we don't know where we've come from, the beginning, what's the beginning of the story? If we don't know the end, how's it going to end? Where are we going? Then, yeah, if we're only mired and stuck in this fog now, then it is all up for grabs. Then maybe I do have to create my own reality. But pause for a second there. If we're the storyteller, it doesn't have a happy ending. How could I possibly? I did not make myself. I did not will myself into existence. And so we need a good story. We need not only a good story, but we need to plug into the great story, which we are in. And I think Lewis and Tolkien, again, with their baptized imaginations, as Christian Catholic men, they know our origin story. They know where we've come from. And it didn't come easily. It came through struggle with atheism for Lewis, through like death and loss for Tolkien. They've done the hard work. As all the saints, all of our brothers and sisters who've gone before us, they know the story. And I think today we have to plug back into that. Like, where have I come from? Where am I now? Where am I going? And where is the storyteller in all of this?
Yeah, and you're right, to plug into something besides myself.
Yeah.
Because deep down, come on, we all know we're messed up.
Yeah.
If this is as good as it gets, we're in trouble.
Right. Well, there's such a narcissism today. I mean, we're staring into the wrong thing. I mean, Narcissus, the great myth, right, is there he stares into a pool and sees his own reflection and gets so absorbed in it, he falls in and drowns. But, today, what are we staring at? Our phones, our own reflections, so to speak, our TikToks or Instagrams. And there are 30-second reels of just popcorn, digital reality that we're feeding ourselves on, but we want more. We want much more than that.
And what's the motive behind that, by the way? Do you realize that science has been done, that this is how a company can literally make sure that you want to stare at that screen? I mean, it's marketing. But truthfully, God doesn't come in the noise.
No.
He comes in the silence.
Yeah. And the kingdom of noise is what C.S. Lewis calls hell. Right? The kingdom of noise. And in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, one ring to rule them all, one ring to bind them. I feel like that ring has become this whole smartphone world of just stay here. You have everything you need right here in the palm of your hand. It's very much the allure of the ring that I can have that power. But what happens is you become invisible. Think about that. The ring they put on makes them invisible. We have never been so invisible today. People aren't seeing each other.
Physically,
right. We say we
I have this
friends.
Virtual image and this is who I am, but it's fake.
Or having FaceTime, or I have my friends, I have followers on Twitter or X. But it's not embodied. It's not substantial. It's not real. And we kind of know, I think at this point we're starting to feel that vacuum. It's very hollow. It's like,
Well, the
I
incidents of
want real.
depression and anxiety from that, because to your point, it's not real. You know, we were created for more. We were created for the other.
Right.
We were created for love.
Yeah.
Right? Love doesn't happen on Facebook.
Mm.
You know, it happens between people.
And think about the parallel worlds of Narnia and Middle Earth, right? You've got this idea of winter, never spring in Narnia, which is barrenness, bleakness, no fruitfulness. In Middle Earth, you've got this ring that makes you invisible, isolated. What's the answer? Fellowship. Lewis talks about shadowlands in his mythology, right? This is the shadowlands that we're in, but we need the blessed. And it's a return to humanity. I mean, I find that as an evangelist and a teacher, educator today for the theology of the body, is that I'm trying to get people back to life. It's like humanity 101 to be embodied. And whenever I read Lewis, whenever I read Tolkien, I realize that's what they're trying to do too. And maybe that was even unawares to them. They didn't see what was happening. You know, they couldn't have foreseen where we were going. But in a way, it's very prophetic. It's about being grounded again. There's a lot of Shire hatred out there. A priest friend of mine, Father Patrick Schultz, he talks about there's a lot of Shire hatred. This hatred of just the good earth, the slow process of gardening, enjoyment of
Remember,
fellowship.
you'd be grounding if you were gardening.
Yes, you would be. You're in the ground.
Just saying.
Yeah. And isn't the deep desire of the human heart to be grounded, to be in touch again? So again, that's where Lewis and Tolkien to me are so prophetic. They're such an antidote. And to sit, I just encourage all of your viewers, your listeners to waste time reading their stories.
Gosh, yes.
And you will find yourself enriched beyond expectation, beyond belief. And you're going to get hungry to keep reading and keep going back.
To my next question, it's an invitation. Here's an invitation to you all. It's going to be in a quote, and then you're going to run with it. I'm looking for someone to share in an adventure that I'm arranging, and it's very difficult to find anyone. This is the answer, is it not?
Yes, it is. Oh, I love it. That's not a bad Gandalf voice, though.
We're working on it.
This is the beginning of The Hobbit, right? This is the moment. Oh, I love it so much. Here we all are. These are fairy tales for the modern heart. And in a fairy tale, there's some truth, right? Bilbo Baggins is in the Shire. He's got comfort. He's got his food. He's got his pipe. He's got his garden. He's got everything he needs. He's comfortable. And adventures make one late for dinner. He's like, I don't need that. But that's exactly what he needed, as we see as the story unfolds. And what is the great adventure that Gandalf arranges for him do to Bilbo? Breaks him out of his comfort zone, stretches him, right? Thins him out a little bit too. He starts exercising these muscles that he didn't know he had. But it widens his worldview, challenges him, shows him that he's part of a big cosmic battle, bigger than he could have imagined.
And he's playing a role now.
Yeah,
it gets him out of himself.
Yes, and he's playing an incredibly important role, as we see later in The New Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, that the choices that he made have affected the world. The mercy that he showed to Gollum by not killing him. Again, spoiler alert, if you haven't read these books, where have you been? But the mercy of Bilbo Baggins became constitutive for the rest of the story, became so important for the rest of that. Okay, translate this. I'm arranging an adventure, and it's very hard to find anybody. Why? Well, I just want to be comfortable. I want to be in my little zone here.
And that is today.
That is today. I just want a nice macchiato and a nice Wi-Fi. Give me the password. I've got everything I need right here.
Just leave me alone.
I'm fine. Yeah, leave me alone. I want to stay in this little world. But human life, to be authentically human, to be fully alive, is to break out of yourself. I always teach this, right? Yeah, to live is to move from me into we, to form this communion with others. If we don't do that, we're stagnating.
But it's dangerous, Bill.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Shall I?
yes.
It's a dangerous business, Frodo. Going out your door. You step onto the road, and if you don't keep your feet, there's no knowing where you might be swept off to. Right? That's what it is. It is dangerous.
Yes, it is.
But that's good. That's good.
It's not only good, it's beautiful. And not only beautiful, but essential. We have to be, I'm discovering this every day of my life, we have to be broken. If the Paschal mystery of being broken and poured out and then remade doesn't happen, I mean, that is the tragedy. So we need the adventure of being pulled out of ourselves, drawn out of ourselves. And that's why these stories work. That's why they speak to our hearts. They've touched, I think, 150 million people. Separately, Narnia, the Chronicles of Narnia, the Lord of the Rings have been over 150, over like 35 languages. They've touched the world because...
To the chagrin of the critics.
Yes, the academics and the critics did not like these. What are these two Oxford dons wasting their time on? Stories. But these are the stories that are speaking to what it means to be authentically human. I love it. We need them to build. Actually, Dr. Peter Kraft, he talks about Lewis and Tolkien as being like these chief architects, helping to build this new cathedral where we find our home again. But it's through the back door of imagination and story. But yeah, the whole point of the adventure, I love it. I love that you get those two great quotes there. This is exactly what we need. There's a quote, one step beyond mediocrity and we are saved. One step beyond mediocrity. And that's when you enter into the places you can't control. This is what the world needs.
Yeah.
We need to fall into adventure. We need to fall in love. As Chesterton would say, right? We need this, make your religion less of a theory and more of a romance, Chesterton said. Because then I see the bigger picture. And it is scary. It is dangerous. You will be broken. But the breaking makes you bigger. Your heart bigger.
Yeah,
your
it just
world
takes
bigger.
leaning forward and taking the first step. And it doesn't matter who you are. There's another quote Tolkien said, even the smallest person can change the course of the future. Boy, is that true when you look at history.
Oh, yeah.
Vicarious atonement, we were talking about that on the porch, that you have, doesn't matter who you are, the ability to literally change the world. Because you can do the simplest thing is offer something up even. Yeah. It's a Catholic principle. And we see this with some of the greatest saints. They were the littlest people. St. Teresa. Yeah. Her little way. You know what? I love God by doing the littlest things when no one's watching. Yet she's a doctor of the church.
Yeah, there's something there. There's something, a really rich vein of gold there, because in our brains we think, well, I have to do the big thing. It has to be a big project, a big thing. And we say this all the time. I'm just married, or I'm just a mom, or I'm just a, blue collar worker. Don't say that. Don't say that. Chesterton has this great line: the most extraordinary thing in the world is an ordinary man, an ordinary woman, and their ordinary children.
All of society flows from that.
Yes, that's the nucleus of all human culture and civilization. Yeah. And I'm reminded of this constantly in the work I do, because I do travel internationally and nationally. I'm teaching and speaking all over the place, and I love it. But the greatest adventure is to go back home. I need to be reminded of this constantly. My wife and my children are my greatest adventure. And I can't go out and talk about one thing, the great cosmic battle and the great adventure of, if I'm not living it in the home.
Yeah.
And I know every day I'm challenged by that. Like, this is the greatest adventure. Me being present to this person that I love, me being faithful to them. And then if I can get that, everything else starts to flow from it and flows from it and back to it.
Yeah, the importance of every person. What do they say? The hand that rocks the cradle rocks the world.
Rules the world.
Right?
Rules the world, yeah.
But who's rocking the cradles now? You talk about misformation, and you talk about wounds. You talk about, so many people are put in a difficult situation where they have to use things like daycare, and maybe they might not want to.
Yeah.
We're in a dark time, a difficult time.
Yeah, Lewis and Tolkien spoke into that a lot. They hated the whole sad effects of the Industrial Revolution in many ways. The whole mechanization of things.
Yeah.
And it's become soulless. It's taken us away from our hearts. And yet we create these monsters, so to speak, and then I think we have to keep going, well, it's progress. Really? Is it progress, though? I think it's a degress. It's a devolution. And they're trying to get us back to that soil again, back to the Shire,
Yeah.
back to the wonder of the earth as made good by God. And don't depart from that. In the spiritual world even sometimes. I mean, Lewis says, be careful of becoming more spiritual than God. God loves matter. He made it. He loves it, Lewis says. And so don't be afraid to descend into that and just live and breathe. And these are the miracles. And we're really struggling with wasting time these days, aren't we, Bill? I love that when I got here a little early, we were like, let's go. And we went in the back and we just smoked our pipes. And you said a number of times, what a beautiful day.
Oh, it is.
And it is right now, I know. Because I can see the blue sky and the trees out there. And this is the thing. Today with this, post-industrial revolution and the digital revolution, and we just move, go, do more, expand. It's like, actually, maybe we need to contract a little bit. Maybe we need to simplify and not be afraid of or ashamed of wasting time. Being rather than doing. This is the gospel. Right?
You have to you have to have a lack of noise to even think.
Yes, that's where the fertility comes from. There's this great word lacuna, which is an unfilled space.
That lacuna matata?
Well, no, but thanks for putting that in my head for the rest of the day. The lacuna is the unfilled space. It's the little gap. It's the that really is in my head now.
It means no words.
No, see, my lacuna just got filled with Hakuna Matata. But think about our world and how we feel guilty. We can't do it. We can't just stop and waste time. But the second you sit down, you pull your phone out.
Yeah.
The second you arrange an Uber to pick you up, and then you stay on your phone.
Yeah.
And it's
very American though.
It is very American.
It's a Puritan remnant, if you will.
Yeah,
industriousness and.
But I think when this is what I get from the great stories that I read in Lewis and Tolkien, their imaginations, is the characters going through these movements of there's rest. In Lord of the Rings, there's action and there's mission, but then there's rest. There's Rivendell. There's Lothlorien, right? There's the House of Tom Bombadil. And those are signature moments where the action stops and they get filled up again. And it's the Martha Mary moment, Sometimes in the church, like we're running around like Martha, doing, and Jesus is like...
But who had the better part?
Yeah, slow down.
Yeah.
Mary's just drinking. Okay, so it's like stop your thinking and doing and just drink and be. And this is going to, from this posture of just wasting time, so you fill up and then you give. You give from the overflow.
Yeah.
I think we're burning out today.
We are, because you're not talking about laziness.
No, this is not laziness.
You're talking about actively living.
Yeah.
Breathing.
There's a difference
being
between
thoughtful.
lazy and leisure.
There is.
Joseph Pieper, the great German philosopher, has a great book, Leisure, the Basis of Culture. Leisure is a restfulness. Leisure is a restfulness and attentiveness to reality, to creation, to relationships in my family and my friends, to the movements of my own heart, my own life. I need leisure.
Yeah.
I need restfulness to just know who I am and where I am in the story. And then from that restfulness and drinking in, I rise and I give back.
Yeah, we were modeled a seventh day.
Oh, yeah. The seventh day is so important. Yeah.
Yeah.
The Sabbath.
Yeah, we were modeled that. And, we can't get away from it. We have to be intentional about living. We talk about the adventure.
Yeah.
Tolkien himself talks about if you don't, bad things can happen. A man that flies from his fear may find that he has only taken a shortcut to meet it. That's from The Children of Hurin,
Wow.
which actually Christopher finished for him.
Yes. Right? Yeah. Another one of his stories.
But
wow.
it's true. You're going to be shaped by what you do or what you don't do. And very often what you don't do is going to be worse for you in the long run.
Yeah.
You don't discover, you don't grow, you don't do all the things that you talked about that these amazing characters went through, spiritual, the growth that they went through.
Yeah. That's powerful.
It is.
Yeah. The stories are inexhaustible.
Beautiful. To be destroyed by beauty.
Yes.
Let's talk about that.
Let's speak into that. Yes. Let me look at Lord of the Rings for a moment. Gosh, well, both all their stuff. There's so many moments where there's a haunting beauty in characters we meet.
I have to share one when you're done.
Yeah. But they move us so deeply, sometimes to tears, if we're very attentive. And what is the point of beauty in some of these stories? You know, let me use one example to make it concrete. In The Lord of the Rings, as the hobbits are making their way, this is early on in the story, they encounter this wicked old tree, Old Man Willow.
The Old Man Willow.
It's so mystical and crazy the way he writes this. But they come from this absolute tragic moment of almost, and nightmarish experience of almost dying. Suddenly they're taken into a place of incredible beauty. The house of Tom Bombadil.
Yeah.
And if you've only seen the films of The Lord of the Rings, this is not even touched, and I'm kind of glad he didn't go there. But it's this wonderful, enigmatic figures of Goldberry and Tom Bombadil. So a man and a woman who live in this haven of absolute fruitfulness and beauty and peace, untouched by evil. In fact, the ring doesn't even have any power or significance. Tom Bombadil couldn't care less, and he sees right through it. Those moments are so mystical, and you realize in that there is something beyond. And I know what passage you're thinking of later.
Yeah, I have it right here.
Encounters, you got to read that next. But we need beauty to remind us that there is transcendence, that there is a world untouched by evil. And I think, to use the image of the cross, which we're all so familiar with, we can get stuck in the horizontal plane, time and space, where it's like there's fear and there's anxiety, and I have to be sure we've got everything, and I got to pay the bills, and how are we going to save money, and what are we going to do now? And the whole world seems crazy right now. We're stuck on a horizontal. Beauty is the vertical that comes down like a sword. It just pierces us. When you encounter beauty, you groan. Right? When people encounter beauty, it's like they've been stabbed.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, sunset, look at that. Or, oh, the baby's laughter.
Pierced by joy.
Yeah,
pierced
or the
by
beauty of another person. You're pierced. Benedict XVI calls it like a rapier, a dart, he says, that has pierced me because it is beautiful and it opens me up. And Pope Benedict says, it then gives us wings. It takes us aloft.
It's one of the arguments for the existence of God, actually.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
When you see something that just profoundly affects you, you realize in those moments there must be more.
Yeah. It shocks you out of the mundane for a moment.
But you have to have your eyes open living that adventure to see it. Going back to our previous point, here's the quote that one of my favorite in the book, and actually Peter Jackson included it in the movie, which was wonderful. There, peeping among the cloud rack above the dark tor, high up in the mountains, Sam saw a white star twinkle for a while. The beauty of it smote his heart as he looked up out of a forsaken land, and hope returned to him. For like a shaft clear and cold, a thought pierced him, that in the end the shadow was only a small and passing thing. There was light and high beauty forever beyond its reach. Now they're on their way to Mordor, and everything's burnt up, smoke, everything, and then all of a sudden, this little twinkling
in the middle of the cross, the way of the cross, so to speak. I
had an experience at church many years ago, and I cannot put it into words. And it was like it was almost like a revelation of heaven. It was just some amazing experience, and the choir was singing, and I looked up. And something pierced me just for a minute like a star. And I felt a sense of joy that I cannot put in words. I've never felt it since. It was transcendent.
Wow.
I was lifted out of this world for an instant. And this quote takes me back to that moment because there was something there. I don't know. I know what the author of is. Yeah. But I long for the return to that place.
Oh yeah, you're getting me into now a vein of thought that. Praise God for that signal grace, by the way. And I've had moments like that too. That just I'm so conscious that I did not manufacture this. I didn't dream this up because I'm sad. I didn't make up a story. I just got rocked by something unplanned, total gift.
Recently?
No. I'm
okay.
saying in general in my life, but yeah, actually it does happen quite often. But this is what kind of happened to C.S. Lewis multiple times in his young life, where he talks about, he uses this German word Sehnsucht. Are you familiar with this word Sehnsucht?
I've heard it. I probably heard it in something I read about him.
It's German, means inconsolable longing. It's kind of like Pope Benedict will call it the unnameable something, the known unknown. Benedict calls it the known unknown. So we all know kind of what it is, but we can't wrap our fingers around it. You can't bottle it or capture it, but it moves us. It reminds us that, this isn't the end. And that's what Sam experienced, right? He experienced that the shadow is just a passing thing. I mean, in the blink of an eye, it's gone. There's beauty forever beyond its reach. What's so wild about that scene in Lord of the Rings is that Tolkien, if you've read the Silmarillion, you know that the Silmarillion, the creation story, right? It's the creation myth in Tolkien's world. Like, where did it all come from? Iluvatar is the All-Father, the creator, who makes the Valar, these angelic beings. And one of them, Varda, or in Elvish, Elbereth, right? She's the...
That name alone.
I know, that name alone. She's the queen of the stars. She's the lady of the stars. So what a moment, as this Catholic author, J.R.R. Tolkien, he writes in, it's a very Marian figure. That here's the lady of the stars. And it's Sam looking up and seeing this moment of hope. I mean, that's the triumph of the Immaculate Heart of Mary, if you want to get Catholic. You want to be like,
Yeah, it's a great moment in the book where, they're in the pitch of battle. And I guess, was it Frodo? Was it Frodo or Sam cried out her name?
Yes, yeah.
And I think it was Elrond, or I forget who it was, Gandalf said it wasn't so much the fighting, it was that name that stung the wraiths more.
Yeah, so beautiful. And how often do you hear, say, in the rite of exorcism, where an exorcist will say the name of the Holy Virgin, the name of Our Lady, which has a potency, and the demons hate that.
Yeah, the power of words.
And she is so beautiful.
Yeah.
When St. John Paul II wrote his Theology of the Body, he started writing it on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, December 8th. It was 1974. He started writing it. And on the top right corner of his little yellow legal pad, that's when he wrote Theology of the Body in Polish. In Latin, he wrote, Maria tota pulchra est. Mary is all beautiful. And that's just awesome. And then he writes the Theology of the Body.
It is amazing, the power. You bring up a thought in my mind, the power of words, the power of language. Completely unrelated, but it popped into my head that, when you talk about exorcism and things like that.
Yeah.
Latin, this foreign language, has a greater efficacy in exorcisms than, for example, English. And there's two reasons for that. One is it's the language of the church, and all efficacy comes through the church, right? Through in Christ at the forefront. But the Latin language also brings those demons to the foot of the cross, because inscribed on the cross in Latin was, Jesus Christ, King of the Jews.
Yeah.
So they're constantly reminded of that moment through that, just the use of that language.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful language.
Yeah, it is indeed.
And Tolkien, I'm glad you're saying this right now, because this is a great theme to pick up on. Today, I think words have been so butchered. We have decapitalized so many words, which is like a decapitation. We've cut the head off of them. We've cut the meaning off of them. We have all these little LOL. It's
especially love. The word love is completely bastardized.
Yeah. But Tolkien was a philologist. I mean, that was his main work at Oxford. He was a philologist. He was a lover of language. He spoke something like 9 languages. He was phenomenal, and he knew so many more. Created his own. Yeah. But you think about it, like the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. It's the Word. Yes. The Logos. And the Logos in Greek also means reason. It can mean plan, not just word. And you think about our culture today, which has become so illogical, because we've lost the Logos. when you take the logos, the word out, it's illogical. Things don't make sense. And we seem to be changing definitions of things now today constantly.
Yeah.
So it's like these great writers, again, their love of language is getting us back into the word, the logos. And beyond that, even the music that made the world. And I know.
We talked about this on the
Yes,
course.
we did. I just want to, before we close, I want to mention that was constitutive to the mythologies is music.
Oh, yeah.
Which
Creation of both worlds.
yes, both worlds were made in music. And I think I want to spotlight that, in this conversation, because in music is harmony. In music is also the power of silence, because music flows out of silence. And we need that today. I think people need to rediscover Lewis and Tolkien, but also rediscover that their worlds came from music. Tolkien's Silmarillion was Iluvatar singing through the Ainur.
Wow.
And Lewis borrowed the idea, actually, some say stole, of Aslan the lion singing Narnia into existence. And, it's been said that music is the language of heaven.
What did St. Augustine say?
Yeah.
To sing is to pray twice.
Yeah, there's a potency to it. Yeah. And, music made the world. So there's symphony, there's harmony. And that's everybody in the orchestra contributing their unique individual voices to this great music. And when you fight that, when you don't enter into that communion of voices, that diversity that makes the unity, that's Melkor. In the beginning, in the Silmarillion, Melkor is the Lucifer figure who sows discord in, right? The White Witch in Narnia hates the sound of this music. She hates it when she encounters it in The Magician's Nephew. So a return to music is a return to the language of God.
Amen.
And we need that today. Boy, we need it.
Well, we only have a few more minutes left, sadly, and I didn't even scratch my notes. I wanted to get into this.
I saw that coming.
Yeah,
It's just too rich.
Well, I got a rapid fire. And this is going to be a little bit
do it.
fun. Well, characters you most personally identify with?
Ooh, Aragorn.
Oh, the king.
Aragorn. Well, not so much the kingliness, but the wounded backstory, the history that goes all the way back to Isildur. Yeah.
Okay. Longbottom Leaf or Old Toby?
Old Toby.
An argument can be
Because I
made
have
for both. The first thing that comes to mind when you see C.S. Lewis, a picture of him.
Oh, wow. Smoking a cigarette. He was a chain smoker, a little bit of a cigarette. And the robe. He had the bathrobe
That
on.
smile, right? The Shire or Rivendell?
Oh, Rivendell. Although that's difficult, but I'll go with Rivendell.
I have a better answer. The Shire 6 days a week. Rivendell on Sundays.
I'll take that. That's good.
Who the heck is Tom Bombadil?
He's the music of the Ainur embodied.
Ooh, the music.
Because he's always singing.
Well, this is true, yeah. Wow, I never thought of that. I
didn't make
like
that
it.
Up. I heard it somewhere. And
I
agree.
like it, though.
Yes,
I like
it's the
it.
embodied music.
Was Mr. Beaver an alpha male or beta male?
I think he was an alpha beaver.
All right, if meat's back on the menu, boys, do orcs have restaurants?
Oh, gosh. If they do, it's all burnt. I'm not going.
All right, this is a funny one. Why not eagles to Mordor?
Because eagles in the mythology are akin to angels, and you don't tell an angel what to do.
I have a funnier answer.
Okay, go.
I do. So if you go on YouTube and look up J.R.R. Tolkien, there's like a 30-second interview, and he's talking. He's like, people often ask me, I received the letter once, and they asked me, why not the eagles? And just end it all. And people often ask this to me in pubs. My answer is always the same. Shut up.
Jeez.
You can find that
Because it'd be a
video.
5-page story.
All right. An hour in the room alone with Eustace or a weekend with the Saxville Bagginses.
Oh, gosh. I'll go with Eustace because he had a conversion.
He did, and it's only an hour.
Yeah.
Saxville Baggins, you got to look for your spoons and
Lobelia,
everything.
man, she's a pain.
Glamdrim the faux hammer or a lightsaber?
Glamdring, any day.
Well, you can hang it on the wall like Father Tom does.
That you
It's
could, the
beautiful.
sword is sweeter.
All right. So tell us one more time about this retreat.
Sure. It's a pilgrimage, which with retreat-esque reflections that we'll be giving, but we're going to England. It's July 16th to the 25th-ish. I hope I have those dates right. We are going to pubs and places of worship and churches. We're going to see the tombs and graves of Tolkien, Lewis, and Chesterton. We're going to walk Oxford, where they taught and lived. We are going to go through the Cotswolds, which is like the Shire, which inspired Tolkien. We're going to read their stories. We're going to experience their lives. And we're going to do that in a very prayerful atmosphere with Mass and reflections every day. Our chaplain is Father Kevin Fox from Cleveland. And I can't wait to go.
That sounds amazing.
tobpilgrimages.com is the website.
tobpilgrimage.com. That's how you get onto it. We will have a link on this.
Yeah.
And I ask, please like and subscribe. Put comments in there. We're small enough. I can read all the comments, and I do. Let's get some Tolkien and Lewis going in the comment section.
That'd be great.
And my brother,
Yes.
I thank you so much. God
Thank you,
bless
Bill.
you.
My
Bill
pleasure.
Donaghy at the Theology Body Institute. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you.